seriously, how many more articles do we need on this topic? Let's clear the air today, once and for all. Daniel Ricciardo said it himself.
No cadillac? No.
So why does this story keep resurfacing? I don't think Daniel fans' hearts can take this anymore. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, Law. He said that 2 months ago. He might have changed his mind. Cadillac may want him. Because Mario Andretti said that he wants an experienced F1 driver alongside most likely Colton Herta. The senior Andretti member who was retained by General Motors is most likely not looking at Daniel Ricciardo simply for the fact that he probably gets that Daniel Ricciardo is sick and tired of Formula One right now, having been burnt so many times. And can you blame Daniel for being really weary and just bored of all the speculation after what he's been through the last few years? No. As he said, he's done. At least with F1. And if you want my honest opinion of who should partner Colton Herta in 2026, it should most likely be Sergio Perez, simply for the fact that he clearly has unfinished business with F1, and his newfound feistiness displayed in 2024 after a battering in 2023 indicates to me a desire to finish Formula One on his own terms, with Cadillac's North American clout a notable trait. That, and I think the team in their debut season could do with an injection of Mexican fans into their roster, really wanting to stick it to Christian Horner and Red Bull, and not to mention the sponsorship money will certainly help bolster their coffers. Because we've got to remember, General Motors as a company has about $100 billion in debt collectively, so, as Tesco says, every little helps. So let's talk about that key factor behind Ricciardo's ultimate F1 burnout, and what would be part of Checo's revenge: Christian Horner. We all know how Red Bull loves their mind games. They brought back Daniel as a third driver after McLaren let him go, albeit on relatively civil terms, and he's probably thinking, oh, this could make great PR if we decide to give it a go with Daniel, who could make some great interest and make everyone not hate us anymore. But as we know far too often, internal politics at Red Bull, they tend to complicate things. But back when Daniel signed in 2023, it wasn't nearly as muddled. At that point, Liam Lawson wasn't on their radar, and Yuki Tsunoda was still struggling with his temper. Plus, tensions between Max and Checo were bubbling up after incidents like Monaco and Brazil in 2022. So yeah, Ricciardo returning to the main fold? It seemed plausible, but as 2023 moved on to 2024, that promise vanished. Daniel's role was reduced to being merely the face to secure the sponsorship deal with Visa and Cash App. That's not exactly a comeback dream now, is it? Now, don't worry, I'm not going to be going through the whole story of Daniel Ricciardo's really messy divorce with Formula One. I think we all know it at this point, but I think there are some good points to make, though. Things changed over time, and what was promised to Daniel simply failed to materialize. That's just the cold, hard fact. Especially when you take into account the CEO of Cash App vocally lamenting the decision to drop the Australian after Singapore without him even knowing about it. Which, by the way, was something that was scrubbed off the internet very, very quickly, because the passionate cries of a CEO, yeah, that can send shockwaves amongst the markets, and yeah, I get that you really like Daniel, but oh, the investors, oh, they don't like that. We remember, though. But needless to say, I think you can easily tell that that was probably the end of Daniel Ricciardo's relationship with Formula One. I wouldn't be surprised that we don't see him anywhere near it ever again, because why would he want to be somewhere where he's basically had stop, start, promises given, then broken? There's nothing left for him anymore. In all honesty, he's probably gotten sick and tired of all the hopium and promises that have been offered him. He can do better elsewhere. And on a technical level, you could easily say that he just didn't gel well with the ground effect cars. Much like how Lewis Hamilton openly admits that he sucks when it comes to trying to qualify in them. It happens. Sometimes drivers just don't sit well with a particular car, whereas others thrive. And there was something about the regulations which produced a car which simply didn't agree with Ricciardo's driving style. Couple that with reality hitting hard for him at McLaren, where the 2022 car really didn't agree with him, not to mention him failing to acclimate to the Mercedes power unit and the power delivery it offered him and his braking style, and he admitting that actually that was one of the major factors he went to McLaren because he thought the idea of driving a Mercedes power car was cool. Yeah, that wasn't so cool in the end. That was a serious lapse in judgment, Daniel. It was almost as bad as Fernando Alonso's career moves. So, yeah, maybe you should have just stuck with Renault. That would have been so much less complicated. And maybe Renault might have stayed known as Renault, and they wouldn't be quitting the sport. So, butterfly effect. Okay, that just sounds pretty standard then. A driver who was great in his heyday simply just cannot keep up with the way and manner Formula One progresses. It happens all the time. It's part and parcel of the gig. You start off great, you peak, and then you trail off, and then you decide when to call it a day. or if the team decides to make that call for you. It's the classic case of Formula One moving away from a naturally gifted driver with a personality which charmed the world and played a major part in why the sport has become a huge phenomena internationally, and today. In fact, I would argue that Daniel Ricciardo is almost as influential as Lewis Hamilton in bringing brand new people and eyes toward Formula One, because even though he is not as much of a cultural impact as Lewis, he is still one of the many major faces of Formula One, even though he's no longer in the sport, because simply he's everywhere. He's more than happy to talk to people. You see him on talk shows all of the time, and he's probably one of the first people that agents call and say, "Get me an F1 driver!" I think he's more open to chat in a way than Lewis is, because I always think that Lewis is a bit more private, whereas Daniel's a lot more gregarious, and I think, therefore, in television land, that makes it a lot easier to just have a casual banter. Not to mention he'd make great TV, because all you got to do is just introduce him to a talk show, and then he'll just go, "All right, fellas," and everyone goes, "Oh my god, he's Australian, I love him." People will listen. And you got the impression that he loved all of that stuff. And it really helped that he worked closely with Netflix in the early days of Drive to Survive, with his journey away from Red Bull to Renault happening in the very first season, which really, coupled with the antics of one Gunther Steiner, aiding the experimental series gaining a massive chokehold across the world, as Liberty Media began to, try and hook new and younger fans in. And now we're in this position where Netflix is considering buying the broadcasting rights to Formula One in the United States. How far Netflix has come, eh? Now, I know that the Senna docuseries was relatively lackluster, but hey, at least they're trying. You've got to really give them credit for the way they managed to recreate those cars. That was absolutely gorgeous. But either way, that is not a terrible idea. But based on the polls I made on social media, including my YouTube community area, which has been really beefed up for some reason, you should go check it out, including you be able to share your own voice, people actually just give a collective But you got to admit, the current owners of Formula One are at least trying to make an effort, because Bernie Ecclestone back in the day, he didn't make any effort whatsoever, because he didn't care about young people, because they didn't give him any money. If Bernie was still around, F1 would be so irrelevant today. But speaking of Daniel and Gunther in a way, that casual appeal and fanbase is something that quite a few Formula One news sites are really latching onto, trying to pump up hope amongst their respective fan bases that maybe they might make some kind of triumphant return. And they're really running out of time before these personalities fall into relative obscurity, and it just doesn't bring them clicks anymore to their homes, which in a way, ironically, you could accuse me of doing all. But hey, at least I'm trying to warn you and remind you that, hey, these people have lives and ambitions that maybe go past Formula One, and maybe they want to write the next chapter of their lives. So, hey, don't just latch on to every single crumb of hope here. Just try and be a bit logical, and also, just these news sites, just stop, please. But what I'm trying to say is that Cadillac hope I mentioned at the beginning is the final hook that may keep people clicking. That this team, spearheaded by the Andretti duo of Michael and Mario initially, might be both men's sanctuary if they fostered hopes of getting back into the sport, in which to get maybe theatrical and narratively poetic revenge. That's the kind of hopes and dreams that these news sites latch onto, and I find that personally unfair, because not only is it really illogical for both men to get back into the sport because, well, their time has come to an end, they had their chance and now they've decided that they've had enough, but also both men have actually come on record to say that no, they are not interested in a return with Cadillac or even Formula One in general. And then when Gunther Steiner was asked this about a potential move back to Cadillac, Steiner basically just said, no, no, no. So, yeah, I think they both said no. But wait, why would they say no to that, Law? They're giving up a potential chance to continue to be in Drive to Survive, to be in the public eye for so much, and they'd have so much money, because Formula One is all about money. Well, I will tell you why they said no. Because they can now be talking heads and make still a decent income without having to train every waking hour of the day. Or in the case of Gunther, being in multiple meetings throughout your entire working day, as well as having to, as Steiner did so expertly and bizarrely, hawking sponsorship brands like, boats and garden furniture. I don't think you need me to tell you that since their ascendancy to casual stardom, both Daniel Ricciardo and Gunther Steiner either have great people around them or a shrewd head on their own shoulders to go, I'm quite popular, and I have ideas I wish to realise, and now I have some free time to execute these ideas. Sure, Formula One is still something that they have some sort of fond memories of, but that time of their lives has now well and truly ended. So maybe in the next phase of their lives, where they can now set out what they want to do with their time and maybe plan some retirement options, they can now look to other avenues that they find interest in. And even though the idea of Cadillac is a poetically nice one, it's not a practical one because, for starters, there are other drivers than just Daniel who still have the F1 fires burning available possibly. And in the case of Gunther, well, the team already has a principal in place, the one Graham Loudon from the Manor Racing days. And besides, I'll just bring out the phone here because I'm obviously not in the room where it happened, or if it even happened at all. But I can easily imagine that maybe Mario Andretti did approach Daniel Ricciardo and asked him if he were interested, but then they might have had a frank phone call where Daniel just said, nah, no thanks, I'm okay, and then Mario would have understood that maybe the fire for third time's the charm in Formula One might have been extinguished, and that Mario knew that there was no point in trying to rekindle that blaze with Cadillac and just go, yeah, okay, alright, I understand. Thanks for letting me know, Daniel. We'll move on with our search. Good luck with your own future. And then it would have ended at that. Amicable between two drivers, the 1978 world champion would have simply understood that if you don't have the hunger anymore, there's no point trying to just go ahead anyway. Especially since Red Bull put in a half-hearted go of it a couple of years back, which most likely expedited the desire to maybe leave and look elsewhere. So here's my take. Let Ricciardo and Steiner move on. They've earned it. F1 was their life, but it's not anymore. Yeah, because Ricciardo's got his clothing brand, his wine businesses, and other ventures. Gunther's living his best life. I went to go and see him on tour in London. He seemed to be having a whale of a time with hawking his books, as well as giving his takes in punditry podcasts left, right, and centre, as well as making occasional appearances on F1 TV and the post-race and session interviews, where he actually is finding his feet as being a talking head and giving his own opinions, which I will admit are very entertaining. I would love to see Gunther Steiner and Jacques Villeneuve in the same room, just talking smack about Formula One. And even then, not everything in their lives has to revolve around Formula One. But if you are really desperate and dead set to see Daniel Ricciardo still driving some cars really, really fast around a track, then maybe the answer to that could be cars which are bigger, heavier, and ones that you can thrash around a circuit and bash into people a whole lot. Stock cars or touring cars. Anything with a great big stonking V8 in them. Because he's always admired Dale Earnhardt and loves aggressive racing, that's why he has the number 3 on his F1 car. And if reports are accurate, Toyota might be ready to capitalise on that charisma and appeal. Time will tell, but for now, let's respect that both Daniel and Gunther have found peace outside of F1. Wait, Law, you said something about Toyota! Explain. Yep, okay. Now, I must stress that this is all speculation. It's not being corroborated via multiple parties and official sources, but this is from what I have heard. And it was stuff that was actually dropped a couple of months ago, but I think slipped people by, including myself, because everyone was just going on about how McLaren won the Constructors in Abu Dhabi, and then Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes. There were plenty of other news stories, which I think this one slipped through the cracks or something like that. But I think that for people who want to know what Daniel Ricciardo is up to in motorsport and don't like the idea of him peddling his brands and wares for the next 30 to 40 years to try and make a quick buck or anything like that, then this next bit might be for you. Now, even though you could describe Formula One as being full of grace and finesse, the absolute pinnacle of motoring engineering, I do get the feeling that at the same time, Daniel Ricciardo, he likes it rough. That if there is a chance to just bash heads and destroy cars with a few dings that don't really matter, and you're not going to get a 5-second time penalty if you just look at another driver funnily, then maybe he might want to go into something where he can do all of that and maybe get a little bit of a break and not nearly as much exposure, and he can actually have some downtime as well, and where the calendar is not nearly as packed. There are two schools of thought in this. Either he would embrace his passion for Americana and look toward NASCAR, or he might want to move back to Australasia and slog it out in supercars. Both series clearly appealed to him, and if the rumours are to be believed, which kind of slipped people by as I said last year, Toyota might be the entity which might offer him an outlet for that passion in either category. Now, I must remind you that this is all still speculation, it's not been officially confirmed, but based with what's going on with Toyota at the moment and how ambitious they've been, I feel like this story might have some legs after all, so I thought I would share it with you just for the sake of discussion and argument as well. Whilst it's clear that F1 isn't on Daniel's radar anymore, the idea of going racing might still be so. There are ruminations that Toyota is prepared to offer the driver a whatever it takes kind of a deal for his services, with some estimates putting the deal at the region of $10 million in value. And is this a viable way to get Daniel back into motorsport? This sounds like a relatively credible venture, with the original source claiming that Akio Toyoda, the chairman of Toyota itself, wanting to capitalize on Ricciardo's global appeal, talent, and charisma to spearhead an initiative with Toyota when they enter supercars in 2026, or with the Toyota Gazoo operations in NASCAR. So, just for the sake of fairness, here's what the original source said, but remember, let's just take this with a pinch of salt until we hear it from Toyota or Ricciardo's mouth themselves. Ahem. I've been told, this is an insider source by the way, that Toyoda-san can see his, Ricciardo's, value. Not just as a driver, but as someone who can drag in the fans in huge numbers because of his natural charisma. He can't see any downside with having him as the face of Gazoo Racing, which really is his pet project. And, from what has been told to me, it's almost a blank check operation to get him to say yes. Now, Toyota, they know a thing or two about rejuvenating old F1 drivers' ambitions and desires, because we all know what happened with Fernando in endurance racing with Toyota Gazoo. He went on to win the thing with them, and then he goes back to F1. So, Toyota, please, give Daniel his passion back. But maybe not necessarily in F1, just make him smile and winning races again. But seriously, this does not sound overly far-fetched, because after all, you can't deny, Toyota have been very frisky as of late when it comes to their global motorsporting ambitions after pulling back hard at the end of the 2000s. They've been ramping up their single-seater campaigns, especially with the Junior Formulae, and their conduit via Alpine and Hitech into F1 itself, as well as emboldening their relationship with Haas. I recall a list on Toyota Gazoo's website they put out about every single detail of all of their global operations in motorsport and what they plan to do for 2025 and then maybe beyond. So who's to say that maybe in the fullness of time, if Daniel Ricciardo's had a bit of a break, he might sign on with them either in NASCAR or in V8 supercars or something. But either way, both series would benefit immensely, especially Netflix if they get him in NASCAR, because that NASCAR full speed documentary with Daniel just rocking up, just saying, oh, I'm more than this, yeah. And if he chooses V8 supercars, it would lead Toyota making a big splash in his native Australia, and simply, this would be absolute gravy no matter which series he picked. These all sound perfectly logical decisions, but as of now, they are not set in stone, nor have they been corroborated by more official parties, I just have to remind you. But like I just said, Daniel might want a break from motor racing and Formula 1 altogether, not be in the spotlight so much, focus on his businesses, he can give them much more time, and then really think about what he wants to do with them. Much like how Charles Leclerc probably would like to have some more time dedicated to music and then hawking his ice cream. I'm still waiting for Sainsbury's to actually stock that ice cream. I do want to know what it tastes like. Seriously, let me know down in the comments, has anyone actually tried the stuff? But one thing I reckon is for certain, he will not be partnering up with Red Bull ever again, as there are no reports confirming about whether he has any ties left with them after being dropped mid-season. And besides, why would he want to be affiliated with a team that promised him a return to Max Verstappen's side and then had that opportunity maybe taken away from him in some bizarre fashion after the Belgian Grand Prix? Make no mistake, I swear that some kind of deal had been done around the Belgian Grand Prix weekend. We heard it from everyone within Red Bull. The signs were clear. If Checo didn't produce a really good result that weekend, which he didn't by the way, despite really qualifying in a good position, then that was it. It was done. That contract extension, torn up, torn to shreds. Checo had had his chance and he would have blown it. And also, Daniel Ricciardo finishing 10th and then talking in interviews looking like he'd won the damn thing, that looked really suspicious. Maybe he knew something was going on. Maybe Max Verstappen knew that what was going on. And since he doesn't really care about who's his teammate because he just wants to focus on his own thing, especially since the car wasn't really agreeing with him, then maybe having Daniel there, that'd be a nice little distraction, nice little interlude. Maybe he might have been the ticket to at least kept Red Bull in contention for second place in the Constructors. Who knows? We won't know for sure because it's already done. But them flying away to their accommodation in that helicopter, it was an indication that maybe they were back together once more, but then suddenly they weren't. I can easily imagine that after this bait and switch happened, the relationship between Daniel and Red Bull was probably forever damaged, and there was nothing left for Ricciardo to aim for, because after all, he said so himself. His original goal was Red Bull or nothing, and He ended up with nothing. His situation and the manner of his departure from the sport was yet another negative factor in an absolutely terrible year for Red Bull's public relations department. Seriously, last year was such a bad year for them. So I could easily understand if Ricciardo was just sick and tired of the general politics of Formula One, that even if he loved driving those cars, the stuff going around outside the cockpit, yeah, it's just not worth it. And even though he probably misses the trappings that come with the job of being a Formula One driver and the riches and offers and opportunities it hands you, maybe a raw, more visceral experience, maybe outside of the majority of the public limelight, away from the FIA especially, means that he might be finding a way to re-energize his love for racing, kind of like with Lewis Hamilton and his situation at Ferrari. And despite no longer being privy to the celebrity trappings of being a Formula One driver, maybe that's just not what Daniel needs right now. Maybe he just needs something simpler, more raw. Either he finds his feet in his native Australia, or in the USA where he now calls home in LA. If not, then he has plenty of other opportunities handed to him. Seriously, I remember that when it was made clear that Daniel Ricciardo's time in Formula One had come to an end, you got sports that had nothing to do with Formula One or even cars wishing Daniel Ricciardo well with his next part of his adventure. I saw the NFL congratulating Daniel and wishing him all the best. They have nothing to do with each other. And that just goes to show how much of an influence Daniel has had within general culture, almost as much as Lewis Hamilton. And if you put those two in the same room together, oh, seriously, it would be just as spicy as Charles and Lewis together. Either way, Daniel's got something left in the tank, like how Lewis Hamilton's got something left in that tank over at Ferrari, and so far his preparation has gone incredibly well, unless the fandom decides to have their way and proceeds to derail the team's efforts to unify their drivers. To find out why I think the war of words potentially between Team LH and the Lec Foci could be the undoing of the Scuderia's efforts to win any sort of championship this year, watch this video next, straight after this one.